Today we have an FSM 11 overview for you. Our presenters are Mr. Keith Whalen and Mr. Richard Lee Stout. So with that, I'd like to introduce Keith and Stout, FSM 11.
Hey, thanks.
Thank you, Jackie.
Yeah.
And now I'm going to talk about global HR. Just kidding. So here today, very exciting. We're going to do a little overview, sneak preview on version 11, FSM, at the very front end of that cycle. We expect that to be going on for quite a while. We know that Infor's definitely been talking about it a lot, but a lot of the community maybe hasn't been exposed or seen as much. So just want to show you a little bit about it here with my colleague, Mr. Stout.
I'm excited to pull back the curtain.
Woo woo! There we go. So
there's a blackout button on the remote. Yeah.
Oh, what does it do?
It blacks out the screen.
Oh, how do I fix that?
Press it again.
I don't know which one it is.
Just press all the buttons.
This is Technical Consulting 101. All right, let's try that again. All right, so our agenda today, a high-level overview on FSM 11 and what it is. I do feel like there's still some misinformation on what it represents and so forth, pretty important. And then, we're going to look at key functionality, especially the new flexibility with GL dimensions and reporting and meta-analytics. But first, we're going to talk about navigation because it's sort of a little bit different look and feel. We have an Infor storyboard that we're going to reenact, Mr. Stout and I, and then we're going to talk about what the planning is to take on something like this. First thing is about our PI. We're nice people. And when you inquire about FSM 11, this is how happy it makes us.
Yeah.
So please do so.
It lights up our faces
Sure
when a customer asks us for more information on the next generation financials and supply platform.
We like customers and we like cool projects.
Yeah.
So there you go. Not as excited when somebody asks us about Report Writer, unfortunately, but
no.
Not all projects can be cool.
Yeah, or necessarily exactly which modules are included in which Infor bundle, because
yeah, they change.
That might be a question for your Infor sales rep.
Exactly.
And,
which we are not.
Which we are not, but we try to give our honest take on what we see going on. We have hands-on experience with the software. We're keyed into all the Infor events and all the communication.
And we pay attention to all the communication.
Sure. So what we're presenting today is our analysis and observations as an outside party, not part of Infor.
Awesome. Very fun to do. So first, as with all version 11 or FSM presentations, we have an Einstein slide, right? Because I don't know why. We just like it.
Because this software is genius.
It's genius. It's also the next generation of Lawson. So that's a term that we use a lot because it is not built on LSF, right? It's not COBOL-based.
It's not COBOL.
It's not an upgrade the way that we've seen for the last 4 or 5 iterations. It is actually a switch of a platform, for lack of a better term, and it leverages a more modern design elements and tools.
Yeah, Cloud Suite Financials and Supply Management is new software. It's built on the latest generation of technology. And
it's pretty different too, right?
It's pretty different than Lawson, but its roots are in St. Paul, Minnesota. It shares the DNA with Lawson, and it was created by the same group of people that have been working with Lawson customers for 20 years.
So, I would say that on top of that, there's a shift when we look at this, and also I think global HR a little bit, past sort of the old school or early business applications that were more transactional, and especially with financials, more surrounding regulatory requirements, and this is more about supporting operational decision making, right? So this isn't about producing new financial statements for the SEC. This is about giving you access to that information that your organization needs that probably today is getting dispersed through multiple reporting systems and data cubes. And it's fairly complex to get quickly, right? So when they rethink this, they're rethinking, how does this need to be structured for this data to come out easily.
Right.
And I think that's really important. And when Stout's talking about the same people, it's not just developers, it's the folks that have been developing, implementing Lawson for 25 years.
Right.
That worked within the constraints that Lawson's traditional GL accounting unit structure had, and saw what additional needs there could be. So from that perspective, it's a nice leap forward. Version 11 is back. So this we're hearing is that the number is back in vogue, and it's being called FSM 11. We'll see if that holds or changes. The official name of these products are Cloud Suite Finance and Supply Management and Cloud Suite Human Capital Management. We got a little thing popping up here. Okay, and when we look at the finance and supply management, which is what we're going to focus on today, there's a few things that are different, and it'll come up in a second. One is obviously the general ledger and some of the subsystems surrounding it are replaced by this more flexible global ledger. So when you look at things like multi-ledger, strategic ledger, those things disappear. And if you think about it, those were sort of workarounds to track additional ledgers or detail or calendars that now can all be done in global ledger because of that increased flexibility. We have the equivalence of a lot of the modules we're familiar with. We also have the integration of some of the modules that got developed in Landmark over the last 10 years, like cash and treasury and close and reconciliation. Likewise, over on the supply management side, we have the equivalent of all the traditional modules that we've worked with, plus contract management. One thing that I think is important when you're looking at Cloud Suite is that it's not modularized, right? It's not this is a module that you buy and this is another one. It's a product suite that's packaged, and that's a big part of Infor's direction, which we think is great, first of all, because everybody has the same set of tools. But, I'm sorry, you have a question?
Yeah, based on the disclaimer, is there still some ambiguity of which applications are available out of the box? Infor stated that everything is included, unlike before, but it still seems to be iffy that the client will get everything. So
obviously the best person to answer that is your individual Infor rep. But again, I can tell you, as part of Infor's direction, that they are productizing suites around industries, right? So when you look at Cloud Suite Financial Supply Management or Cloud Suite, corporate versus public sector versus healthcare, they might not all have the same things because some of those applications are industry specific. But this is a standard Cloud Suite Financial Supply Management suite, and it would also include the underlying layers of things like IPA and ION,
right.
Et cetera. So I think the rep's the best person to ask, and I don't think that Infor is trying to be tricky in any way. They're just trying to make these complete solutions by industry. So for the most part, if you're healthcare and you look at healthcare, it should have everything you need. If you're public sector should have everything you need. You start to get into different industries, maybe you start with corporate and work for that. I hope that's helpful. Along the same veins, Infor is also migrating towards, obviously, the cloud, though this solution does not have to be on the cloud. You can implement it on-premise. And it's also transitioning towards multi-tenant, which I hear a lot of hesitation out in the market. And I guess I just want to explain the why real quick, right? When you have what Lawson had, right, which is 1,500 customers with different software footprints, running different versions and patch levels on varying technologies, it is really challenging to keep the software moving forward, right? It's a lot of iterations to account for and accommodate. And the one thing that when we look into the future, we can know is that the speed of change is only going to accelerate. So the more they can consolidate the FSM client base onto a similar platform, the more rapidly they can adjust to whatever develops in the next 10 years.
Yeah, this is certainly in line with where we see the rest of business software going. And it reduces the need for those monolithic testing cycles. and allows updates to come out rapidly with minimal impact to the business.
Absolutely. So let's talk about, we're saying there's some similarities and some differences. When we say shares DNA, I mean there's a lot that is very similar, which we're going to get into. But some of the major differences, one is the GL is basically reworked from an infrastructure perspective. It's a lot more robust. And the way that they've done this is they've added what are called dimensions. So dimensions would have been what we previously knew as company, account, accounting unit, activity. Now they're saying, hey, there's up to 14 of those, and you can name them whatever you want, and you can put together the different requirements of where and when they get used and how they relate to each other, right? So what they're hoping that will do is give you a lot more flexibility in terms of how data is accessed out of your system for the different ways your organization, budgets, department heads might break down to allow you to see where you need to invest time and effort and what's working well. As part of this, right, because this whole enabling, operational decisions is embedded analytics. So instead of having to take all this data out, put it somewhere else, it's all coming out of the box. It's all interdynamic. And, it's one of the things we look at for doing true BI. Just getting the initial setup can be a 3-month process. Here, it's getting created at the same time you choose these dimensions. We're going to look at that a little bit. There's the integration of these landmark applications for supply management and financials that have been developed over the years. So
APIA.
APIA is one, contract management, cash treasury management, close and reconciliation. So you get those included now. And there's a couple things that they've changed sort of systemically. And a good example that we like is effective dating. So whereas in Lawson you have these audit flags scattered throughout the system that you have to turn on to track specific transactions, which is really sort of a storage thing from 30 years ago. Yeah. Now it's just anything you touch is going to track who touched it and when and what the update that was made. And there are no flags. It's just inherent. And when you first start watching folks that have been navigating global HR navigate through FSM, it just becomes instinctual to sort of just click the actions, check the audit, see what happened, right?
Yeah.
And then also sort of important, and we're going to start with this one in a second, is the navigation, because it's pretty different. We think it's fantastic, but there's going to be some change, shock, we think, for the Lawson community as they migrate onto it.
Sure.
Now, so all that stuff's different. What is the same? Well, the transactional processes are the same. The rec to PO or rec to check is all pretty much the same. IPA, it's the exact same IPA we've been using for a long time.
You could even be on that same version today in your Lawson 10 environment.
The IPA version that would work for 11. And there's more delivered flows, which we're going to talk about, and sort of everything else. So there's a lot of business process stuff that does not change from one system to the next.
Sure.
All right. So let's look at some examples of the navigation. I mean, first and foremost is sort of a philosophical change, right?
Yeah. The idea that you don't bring up Lawson and start with a blank page and need to know exactly what form you want to go to.
That you tell it what product line and form. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So here we're taking a look at a landing page. This one is specific to someone in the finance department, and there are a ton of pre-delivered role-based home pages or landing pages that come out of the system, and of course, as a customer, you can create more. This allows you to easily get access to the different pieces that are most relevant to you.
Yeah, and you can modify these, right? Both the types of charts that it shows and whether there's lists. I believe these are so-called widgets. Sometimes I get lost in the terminology. Widgets.
Right.
So these widgets are not all just data, graphs, or lists. They can be search screens or like precursors to this would be like, for example, your AP10, but it's sort of if you hit create, you would get to the entry form. But from here, you can search and see what's already in there and obviously drill in and checking
Yeah,
from there.
and all these graphical elements, like the charts, you can easily click in and drill in and get to the detail that's
Or change
behind
the
that.
type of chart if a pie chart isn't what makes sense
Sure.
there or for you. As far as form numbers, it is correct that they are gone,
Yeah.
at least at the moment. So in general, think of this as when you go to Amazon, I'm sure everybody's able to get whatever they need on Amazon without having to know the name of the form they're actually on at any time. And that's the type of consumer grade experience Infor is trying to create. However, knowing that there might be some things that you can't directly click or get to, they've added a series of menu items to try and help get you to different spots.
Yeah, absolutely. So you can do direct navigation through the menu, but the idea is that your navigation through the system should flow naturally, clicking through the body of the application just as you would any
Intuitive.
other website. Yeah,
Intuitive.
exactly. Of course, I'm sure that some old school consultants will still refer to the form names, the year 2030.
I will,
Yeah.
for sure.
Couple quick questions. Was that Mingle we were just looking at, or what was the user interface?
Mingle is the wrapper for all this stuff.
So this is the thin client, which would be HTML5.
Right. So everything we're looking at here is web-based, right? The Cloud Suite Financial Supply Management is primarily delivered over the web, not through any sort of thick client that you need to install. And Mingle continues to be the wrapper around the application. Mingle ties together various Infor applications into one unified user interface.
When we were talking about auditing and tracking, does it track inquiry on data?
I do not
No.
believe in tracks inquiry now. There might be ways to do that, but by default, what it's tracking is you're adding, changing, or deleting information. So we got an example of that as well we can look at. Here on the navigation, let's look at one other thing that, minor, but the tabs. So this is an IC11 screen. I'll be using the form names for a while. You see the tabs here are now on the left, right? It's probably just a better way to organize it. I'm sure they had good consultants figure out the optimum way to put this. And here's a screenshot that I'm particularly fond of, right? So this is similar to everything else that we're looking at. And what we have here is that sort of pre-screen where if I hit create, I would get to that IC11, but instead I have the search. And on this first item, I have the rich content and the basic description. And then I have everything's related. So this is basic IC11 data. Right here, I have PO25 data, PO15 data, PO13 data, IC12, and PO20, right? So the form names are gone. The table names have changed to whatever the objects are today, but it's the same data sets that we're familiar with. And if you think about it, this might be the type of information you could right-click and drill into from IC11, and it's all sort of direct on a page. And again, this is all customizable in terms of views and so forth, and how you want to see it. So let's go ahead.
How do you customize the background colors or themes?
I do not know that you can customize the background colors or themes. That's another trend. So the trends sometimes change, so that's part of our big disclaimer. But one of the trends has been for consistent formatting throughout. So that's the latest that I know. So it looks niced out, but tell me, how does it feel? Well, lucky for us, our good friends here at the Baltimore office have taken a little video clip that we may show it to you without having all kinds of logistics and trying to demo it. So here we're using a menu-driven approach, right, to create a journal entry, right? So just processing journals. Every time you open that, it starts with a list, right? Every one of these screens of transaction information that is already in there. And you can filter or open there because you could have millions, right? Or you can create. And here, this is basically what I'll call a GL40 screen or a journal entry screen. You can see that first they're adding header information. Here, this was originally recorded for the Southeast Mega. So we have that as the description. And you can see that I have only a couple of the tabs that are active right now, the currency and totals. And it isn't until I actually create the header, even though it's not technically a different form that I'm doing it, that some of my other tabs, including the detail, make themselves available.
Yeah.
Right, so now we're going to create some
Add some lines on our JE. All right, so at this point, you see we're entering in the specific GL coding for this journal entry line.
Cost center account, which are required.
Yeah.
Project grant here or not.
And of course, the items that we see here are based upon the GL dimensions that we have set up within our finance group. So what your GL string looks like could be different based upon your setup. Also, the required elements might be different based upon what type of transaction this is. Should it require an activity code or something like that?
Exactly, right? I mean, well, that's interesting. So in this journal entry, we're moving money from cash into the same account. So I guess we didn't get too creative with what this might be doing.
All right.
All right, so I think we have two sides to the journal entry now. And you can see that it feels a little bit different, but you're essentially doing the same things here. And we go to our journal screen, now we have the additional journal entry that's listed down here at the bottom. And I believe all we're doing now is releasing it under actions.
Yeah. And what I like about this user interface, the list-driven approach works great because it's easy to just see what data is in the system. I no longer need to go to Excel Query Wizard if I want to pull a list of transactions in a certain status.
And you can filter right there at the top, right? I want this status.
I can quickly enter my filter criteria, get to something by a name or within a range, particular dates, what have you. Also, all of these list views are personalizable. So it's pretty simple for me to bring in a related field into that list and add some additional data, and that'll give me another column that I can sort or filter on as well.
Okay, and then here again, just another small clip. I think in this example, we're just changing the name of the enterprise group to show you the concept of effective dating. So enterprise group is sort of a new concept that lives above the company.
Right.
I can see some uses for it in general, but it's probably with sort of the mindset of going multi-tenant that, to segregate the different data areas. Right, so we made that change, and now this exists. This is endemic throughout. You hit actions, and you just view that audit log. And you can see that Kate Whalen has made all the changes related to this company, but the dates.
We know who did what and when. What did it look like before?
And what it looked like after.
We can view data with an as of date where this comes into play.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So let's talk about some more cool stuff in V11. It has delivered action requests, which is something we've had on the JHR side for a while. It's very cool. It is a renewed focus on being mobile enabled. And again, it's integrated some of these landmark applications that are out there, like API automation and contract management. As far as the action requests, there's a whole host that are delivered, but some of them are the basic ones that you would expect and that we've created many times over the years, where within the organization, somebody wants to request the addition of a master data element that is probably centralized to, control not having a lot of garbage in there.
Right. I mean, the concept here, and this is built into the Landmark platform, is whenever you think about changing or adding data in the application, it's fairly easy to wrap a request and approval process around that, and that's what we mean when we refer to an action request. When we say delivered, there are a few request and approval processes that come with the system out of the box. Such as adding a vendor. I mean, that's a big one. A lot of customers have put a lot of time and effort into building out a custom add vendor
Absolutely.
Maybe using AP51 as a workaround. Lots of different ways we've accomplished this with Lawson. And then here with Cloud Suite Financials, it's pretty much built right in. They are action requests. The approval routing and workflow is powered by IPA. So if you know IPA, it's pretty easy to change what that approval process is.
To enhance it.
To enhance it, add additional approval steps, whatever you need. And then of course, any type of transaction that you're going to do in the system, you could create an action request for. So you can build out a screen where you would take in that data and then create that in Configuration Console.
And does it create a business object just for that on its own?
Well, let's say in this scenario you had a business object that is normally maintained by an administrator.
Yeah.
But you want to push that out and decentralize it and say, rather than having these requests all come to one person to maintain this data, I want to push this out so everyone in my organization that might have an update can put that update into the system themselves. But I still want to have central control.
Right. Yeah.
So that's where my approval process comes in. So I might have an existing type of data, existing business object that I want to extend a user entry form for.
Right. So that user entry form is gathering data or gathering that change request. Where is that information stored?
Well, it's stored in the landmark database along with the rest of the application data, but
it
doesn't take effect until the action request is final approved. So, we're not, when other people are viewing that information, they don't see the requested change until that requested change is final approved and it takes effect.
It sounds like some dark arts in there, but it works, right? One of the other very interesting things is that you can initiate one user and have it routed to multiple users that might complete different actions along the way, which is super cool. And that information can be added as the request flows through. So you get that vendor ad, you happen to know the contact or the phone number. It's something that you can put on, which I know is often a complaint with like rec approvals that I can't fix it. I can only reject it and try to inform them why.
Hey, let's take a look at some screenshots.
We might have a question here.
When you were showing the list drive, it looks great, and was wondering if there's a way to navigate using keyboard shortcuts or not taking your hands off the keyboard, not using a mouse.
I believe there are some keyboard shortcuts, but I am not familiar with them at this juncture. So that's a good follow-up. We have FSM 11 differences tomorrow at 11 a.m., and I'll make sure that they're ready to answer that question.
There you go. Thank you.
So let's take a look at what an in-basket here might look like.
Yeah, so this is actually your standard IPA in-basket. Here we see a couple of roles or tasks that we're assigned to. And I have an item waiting for me. A new vendor request down there is waiting for my approval. So let's pop that open and see what that looks like. All right, so I'm taking a look at my new vendor request, and yeah, we can see that here's the action request form. Now it's already been filled out, right? My requester has entered in the proposed new vendor information, and I've got an approve or reject button down here. And yeah, as you mentioned, I can go and fill in some additional detail, what have you. And yeah, with looking back at Lawson requisition approval, the general rule of Lawson approvals is that while an item is in the approval process, it's in a released, not approved status, which means that it can't be changed. And I think the reasoning behind that is if you have a multi-step approval process, you want to have confidence that each approver in the chain was approving the same thing. Right? Approver 1 didn't approve a transaction for $1,000, and then approver 2 goes and changes it to $2,000 because the system didn't really have a great way to track that. Well, now with our detailed auditing sort of baked into the system, that limitation's been overcome, and now we do have that flexibility for approvers to refine and add additional information and modify transactions as they work their way through the approval process, and everything gets tracked and logged.
So basically, we've been always big proponents and fans of automation, even dating back to the time when we were doing it outside of Infor Lawson, and they continue to develop. I mean, first it was the tool IPA, right? But now they've built the software around making this type of transaction and approval flow more smoothly.
Yeah.
So very exciting, the stuff that you can do with it. There's also a renewed focus on mobile. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. All of the different pages and forms and analytics that you're going to interact with CloudSuite Financials, as I mentioned, primarily delivered through a web browser. And they're all designed and tested to render well on an iPad or an Android phone.
The same page that I would see on my laptop or PC web browser. It's not its own app that I have to install.
Exactly. So Infor is moving away from purpose-built apps. So the old model of, I have one app that does requisitioning, and I have a different app that does approvals. Infor is sort of moving in the other direction and basically saying, let's just level the playing field and say anything that exists in the application, we want to make it mobile friendly. And that philosophy extends to what you might configure or customize as well. So if you're enhancing your application functionality, adding new business classes and new screens, you'll gain that mobile friendly design as well. So you don't have to go build a new iPhone app to interact with maybe some custom business objects that you've created.
Cool.
One other thing that's really makes this work is the general design guidance on analytics, high-level actionable information, highlighting what I really need to get my job done, and reducing the amount of noise and clutter on the screen. So if we see this screenshot here from our tablet, we have some high-level information that's going to help me make some decisions, and I can drill in to get more detail. Compare that to, have you ever tried to use Lawson Portal or an older application on a small screen?
There's a lot of
It's really
data
difficult because there are a
stuff.
ton of fields, and you need to look through and find what is the information I really need. There are a lot of numbers, and it's just not, that type of presentation just doesn't work well on the go. You're not able to quickly ascertain what is the information I'm trying to get out of the screen, and how do I move on to making a decision or what I need to do, where that guidance is sort of across the application. So no matter how large the screen is you're viewing this on, it's more
Fits.
Yeah, it's a better fit for your work, and you don't need a big screen to figure out what it is you're really looking at.
Quick question. If someone's already developed approval flows in IPA, will these convert to FSM 11?
So I think that's something we're going to get into towards the end, but you have to assume that it is a platform migration. So the system that it's transacting data with, the underlying database is changing. So everything's going to have to be updated probably. And you may be better off using those approvals developed and updating those, or you may be better off using the delivered action and changing those.
Yeah, it's the same IPA, it's the same in-basket, but the actual transaction that you're approving is going to be a little different. And I guess it would make sense to go back and just sort of look at, well, does this come as a delivered flow now?
It definitely doesn't transfer automatically is the question.
Sure.
But
And
it might not be
work.
as much work, both because you can reuse what you have and it's delivered.
You've done the hard part, right? You've you've documented what your approval policy is, and
Totally.
you've made that a standard across your organization. So now that you have those business and design requirements, the only question is, do they fit the flow that comes with the new system?
Right, exactly. So looking at some of the other functionality here, so the integration of APIA is really nice. In fact, we find APIA to be really nice in general. It is compatible with version 10, and a lot of folks have deployed it as a landmark application. And historically, we've actually done a lot of work with this dating back many, many years in terms of invoices that required approval or additional data to go into Lawson. And very often, what we've done, and some of our partners, some of our competitors have done, is capture some of that pre-approval information and invoice information in these imaging systems, right? Till it was complete, and then you could upload it into Lawson. And one of the really nice things about having this fully integrated is that this data is in the same system at all times. So, when you look at an invoice, you start in Lawson, and it goes through the different stages of approval. Here you can see unassigned, unsubmitted, pending approval, and whenever you want to get that data, bird's eye view, or complete picture of where all your invoices stand, you can do it in there instead of having to gather information from two systems or have them communicate. We think this is a big leap forward. It's a simplification.
Yeah, an older school philosophy was, my ERP system isn't well designed to work with data in maybe a not final format.
Incomplete,
so
yeah.
I want to keep it pristine. I only want to bring in a transaction that's perfect. Well, now the system actually has that pipeline built into it.
It's real life. This is how real life works.
Exactly. Yeah. And there's a lot of advantages to bringing in the data into your system of record as early on in the process as possible.
True.
So we just saw the mobile experience, and in the mobile experience, is it seamless if a person has both Android and iPhone or iOS systems?
In general, yes, because it's not specific apps on the phone. It's just your browser. And
But we have not
HTML5
done
is
crazy testing here. At some point, maybe we'll have a big cell phone tablet.
Do you know if MSCM is be available in the iOS and Android format, or is that back to the last question?
I do think that it's definitely available on Android now. So mobile supply chain is designed for a device that is used in storerooms, or we see it particularly useful in a healthcare environment. And an iPhone isn't necessarily the best form factor for that particular application. So the Android devices that are out there for MSCM, don't think of your Samsung Galaxy, think of a barcode scanner with a color screen on it.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, they're ruggedized. They're so if a patient gets fluid on it, it can be it can be thrown in the autoclave, and that's not something that would work well with an iPhone.
So let's talk about some of the other functionality on the other side is contract management. I mean, there's a lot of great things about contract management. You should look at it even if you're on version 10. Obviously, it's integrated with the now landmark applications, and think of it as more than just the pricing, the traditional pricing and defaults. Think about the ability to manage the contracting process, rebates, when contracts expire, how you put them together, and also something that Stephanie Cole always tells me is really important is the ability to have special items, have pricing on contracts. So you don't have to add them to the item master, but you've contracted them and you can still get that pricing if people entered them correctly. Sorry, I'm moving here to the real important meat of it, which I guess we sort of buried the lead a little bit. And here's the nice thing about having everything integrated in one system, same as with APIA, is you can see the contracts in various states, not just the completed ones. So let's talk about what really matters here, which is the new global ledger, right? The flexible GL structure. So sometimes we see the term unlimited dimensions We believe that that means 14 because there are 14 on the screen that you can create. So, you know,
It's virtually
you say
unlimited.
tomato, I say tomato, right? You say unlimited, I say 14. But what's important is you have full flexibility in creating these however you want, and these are basically going to be the GL data points that get tracked at any level: journal entry, invoice, PO, requisition. So those things are going to change dynamically to match this, and I can create different relationships. But also, super important, FSM is going to create data cubes
Right.
based on whatever I put here. Tell me about that.
Well, behind the scenes, Cloud Suite Financials is powered by two different kinds of database technology. We have our regular columnar database where transactional data lives, but we also have an OLAP database behind the scenes, and there's a tight integration there. We have a OLAP cube where all financial transactions end up, and our cube dimensions are created based upon our GL dimensions. And that's happening automatically behind the scenes. So as I add new GL dimensions in the system, it's updating my cube. It's also updating the ETL process for getting that cube populated.
Cool. So in general, I think you can see here in one of our sandbox iterations, we don't have a lot of these populated, and we're looking for ideas to populate these. You know, these things are probably going to end up being fairly industry specific and maybe even business specific. And certainly if any of you have some ideas from your own experience and stuff that you'd like to track in your general ledger easily that you don't today, that you might be using attributes or activities in different ways, reach out to us. You know, maybe we could do a WebEx. We can learn a little bit. We can stage it, and we're definitely looking to increase our knowledge on how to apply this. If we're talking about, you know, professional services or consulting, you know, I have some ideas on exactly what, you know, I want to be able to track account, but also service and practice area and customer, and for some of my on the cost side, offices or conferences. So, you know, it's a lot easier when you're familiar with the data that you constantly try to get out of the system, that you spend a lot of time dissecting. You know, how would I organize this to make it simple?
Can I give another example
Absolutely.
to maybe get the juices flowing, get you thinking? You know, Lawson is the #1 ERP system in the healthcare industry in the United States. And sometimes people find it surprising when I mention that. Did you know that Lawson, being the leader in healthcare accounting systems, actually doesn't have a hospital field
It does not.
built into the GL?
It does not, yeah.
Doesn't. But you know, every one of our customers in the healthcare industry has found a way to track and work around this, right?
So a lot of them, for example, will use company, right, because it relates sort of as an entity, but some will not. Some of them are single company setups, and then they have to find other ways to track that information.
Right, where we see, say, AP process level, maybe we see some smart numbering with
The accounting unit
units.
itself, yeah.
Yeah, or maybe there's an attribute attached to the accounting unit showing what facility it belongs to.
So let's talk about the example where it's part of the accounting unit. Maybe it's like the first 2 digits, first 3 digits, and what a burden that is when you're trying to report out on data or create security.
That becomes organizational knowledge, or tribal knowledge, right?
Yeah.
Everybody who works there understands that they can quickly glance at the first couple of digits of the accounting unit and know exactly where this is.
But the software doesn't know that.
Software doesn't know that, which means that out-of-the-box reports are just unable to show you data at a hospital by hospital level. You have to rely on customer reports. You build that logic into every single query or customer report that you're creating. So when you can tell your finance system, this is a hospital, and we have a hierarchical relationship of departments to hospitals, then you get to take advantage of that in the built-in analytics. And
So I think a great summary there is whatever industry you're in, if right now your account, your chart of accounts, account number, or your accounting unit number is doing multiple functions through some sort of smart numbering where different pieces mean different things, then FSM 11 might be a good opportunity for you. So moving along here, one of the interesting things is obviously with accounts accounting units, we create the valid relationships. We can also require activities or limit activities to certain accounts. Here, all those relationships, there's just a lot more of them to manage. Fortunately, there's some wizards to help us create those rules where we can say, hey, for these 3 accounts, this other dimension is valid and always required, and the various combinations, so we don't have to think of every iteration. We tell it and it builds it out for us in the background. Mm-hmm. And at the end of the day, as we were saying, whatever is built in there dynamically alters the data entry forms, right? So this reflects the ones that we'd set up in the sandbox in a journal entry. And sort of why that's important here is the concept of BI self-service.
Yeah. So here we're taking a look at the ad hoc analysis page. This page in Cloud Suite Financials allows me to select a cube and quickly pull out a couple of dimensions to graph that out. So why this is not a
so one dimension becomes an X.
Yes.
One dimension becomes a Y.
And the rest of the dimensions are available to you as user filters. So this might look complicated, and you think, oh well, this is only something a system administrator.
It's actually meant for just regular users, right?
Exactly. And the reason this is actually pretty easy is because we are working with cubes rather than the transactional tables, right? When we think about the Excel query wizard, the Excel query wizard is more of a power user type tool.
Mm-hmm. You need to know the table structure.
Because you need to know the table structure, right? You need to know your Control-Shift-O trick. Well, while the tables in the system are designed to make the application process efficiently, OLAP cubes are designed to make reporting happen efficiently and intuitively. So here I've pulled out an individual cube. I've graphed out my X, what I'd like to see on my X and my Y axis. Everything else becomes an available filter I'd like to use. Any field that includes a date can, as automatic summarization at all of the common reporting periods.
That is one thing that we failed to mention earlier, is that all the calendar stuff, you don't need to use dimensions for. So year, period, month, and quarter, they already come as indexed fields. You can build multiple calendars, so that's an extra data element. And just in general, I think it's important just to reiterate on the dashboards, right? Because that is the future and the general direction, and it's something we're going to talk about a little bit more. I want to keep moving so that we don't run out of time.
Yeah.
But first, I have a story of a lovely lady. So we have a storyboard from Infor we're gonna reenact here, revolving a CEO, head of surgical ops, and a physician in a healthcare facility. And it all starts when the COO gets a notification that the average supply costs are exceeding target values for a department within her organization, right? So looking at the detail around this Mingle alert, she sees that MedSurg 4A is significantly exceeding the budgeted amount. And she asks, right? So the comparison, she sees that it's under the MedSurg supplies specifically, right? A $345,000 variance so far year to date. So she asked the head of surgical supplies through a notification to take a look at this. What's going on? Why is this so far over? Can you research it and get back to me? And transfers the dashboard information. So when they look at the purchase details related to this and drill in, they look at ortho hip plants that are generating a majority of this delta, specific to one doctor that seems to have a strong preference for using Depuis over the less costly Zimmer. They're able to do some what-if analysis to say, hey, if we took 45 of those Depuy and made them simmer instead, what would the bottom line look like? And you can see it's a $312,000 differential. And one of the things we've looked at in healthcare when you look at cost reduction is that obviously medical professionals, doctors are responsible for a lot of these choices, but data is what drives them to make different types of decisions, right? So they talk to the doctor, they're able to get back and say, spoke with the ortho team, and we're able to use less expensive implants for all except the most complex. We expect that this can save us $300,000. What's important here is the concept of setting up your general ledger in a way that helps your business make these types of decisions. Notify and then route through the organization, because I had to know what, right? I had to know very easily. This didn't take me tons of research or someone for 3 weeks, who the doctor was, right. What the products were. And here's some of the stuff. This is getting tracked. This is a requisition, and you can see here in their dimensions they include service line and they include doctor. And with ortho implants specifically, those are usually after the fact created in recs. Some of this data could also be imported from your patient accounting system. But generally speaking, I think that's the big thing that you got to think about is what data would help me, and what data am I spending a lot of time trying to dive into, like for example, expenditures by doctor that would allow me to pinpoint, here's something that I need to invest time into looking at or potentially rethink, or maybe it's the opposite. This is something that's working really well that I need to invest more into. So real quick, I'm running out of time here, but only a couple slides left. So how do we get there, right? How do we get to FSM? That's a conversation we're starting to have a lot with folks. And obviously, the biggest thing is this GL restructure. And our advice is to take your time to build out a sandbox, to think through what you need. That's whoever's in charge of reporting, your financial architect, your comptroller, that understands what these needs are outside of the regulatory requirements, which lots is probably doing already, and set them out and play with it and gain some confidence around what this is going to look like. Once you move forward. Once you move forward, there's going to be some change management. We think is really important because the look and feel of so many things are different, even though so many of them are ultimately the processes are the same. So you can do VPR, but you don't really have to, right? If you're adding requirements and data elements that are getting gathered at the point of requisition, then maybe you have to do a little bit of that. And a very important part to understand is it is a different platform. All your RISE components are going to get redeveloped. Everything that interfaces to and from LSF today, the IPAs that work off of LSF, any extensions,
all those crystal
LSF.
reports or RW.
And I think the most important is the reporting. And I do not get any PDFs via email about Amazon to go look at my information, and hopefully you don't either. I'm always able to find something that I want to order, and if I want to go look at my order history, I do that, etc. And conceptually, these PDFs that we've been pushing out is because it was the best way that we had to put data in front of people.
Yeah.
But
we didn't have another option, right? We didn't have a way to say just log into the application
and look and filter
and see what's here. And now we do. So we're talking to customers that a common question that we get is, do I need to redevelop all 1,100 of my crystal reports?
Hopefully you don't need them.
Right.
Hopefully what these reports were intended to get you just go to a page and it has that data, or there's a dashboard for it.
Yeah, Cloud Suite Financials powers the democratization of business data. Any employee that we want to give access to can come in and quickly see the information that they're looking for and filter on it. It's just 1 or 2 clicks to take this and bring this into Excel as well if you want to do some offline analysis. So there's just not the need for classic tabular reports like there was in previous systems.
That said, we understand that that is a change management issue, which has its complications, and some reporting will probably need to be recreated to satisfy everyone. But
sure.
Okay, that's what we got. We'll take questions. We hope this was helpful. We know it's just a high-level overview.
A couple questions. Is Infor BI a part of FSM, or is it a separate module?
So I think
That's a great question. Let's start with that.
yeah. I mean, are you asking as a system administrator or as a customer of an accounting system? Technology-wise, these are various components that are powered by different servers. But from an end user experience, it feels super integrated. I mean, you can't really tell that it's not one cohesive application of where you're working with transactional data as well as seeing analytics.
Let me add a little bit of that. So from where I stand, the entire sort of drive behind the system is the BI portion, and it has embedded data cubes. And so Infor's BI tools, which can change over time as the software evolves, will be a part of these Cloud Suite products because they want to enable users, right? They want someone to have all this and make it work. So by default, yes, when we say Infor BI, what that means behind the scenes, that might change. Is that a fair?
Another question is in regards to updates and them being pushed out pieces or at large, and what is the impact there? Is testing required? Is there? How do they get applied?
So that really depends on if you're in a single tenant or a multi-tenant environment. Obviously, if you're on premise, you do your own updates. If you're in a single tenant environment, the updates sort of happen on your schedule as a customer. So you'd request to have an update done in test. You test it, and then you'd request to have the update done.
My understanding is that I'm multi-tenant, though I don't fully comprehend how. It's also similar, and I've heard this concept of having an apartment in a building that doesn't have to get painted at the same time. So I think part of that question has to do with the overall direction. The overall direction, which I think is important, is to get to the point where these updates are going across a uniform or uniform-esque Lawson customer base so that they don't have to be tested, but we are not there yet. So I would expect that over the next couple of years, the cycles remain the same, meaning every time that you apply updates, you're going to need to do some testing. I mean, there's where we're going to get to, but there's... It's not fair to say we're there yet.
The updates now are in a much smaller, easier to digest piece. So,
are they? Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. If you check out the release notes for any of the past few, and there's updates that come out several times a month. And if you take a look at the release notes, these are minor changes, targeted changes. They're not like applying an MSP where you have to test every single process, and that's something you can only stomach once a year. It's so much easier now to keep up with updates.
One more question, and that is, how easy is it to correct transactional data? For instance, today, if an invoice is matched to the wrong PO for a vendor and the check has been created, is it a very cumbersome multi-step process to correct this?
If it's about the same. You basically reverse out the transactions. What gets tricky is an audit log correction. Those are a little bit harder to try and work through. So if you can accept that your audit log shows that a mistake was made and then a correction was made rather than erasing that it ever happened in the first place, I think it's about on par with the current system.
All right. Looks like all questions. We're going to thank you for taking the time to join.